Interesting. Okay, Dr. Evans, I'm sure you're familiar with Richard Hayes's work, right? On intertextuality?
Of course.
You're right, of course. Okay, so uh, his book, he's got a book, he's got his most famous book, Echoes of Scripture and the Letter of Paul. And then he's got a smaller book. It's called what is it called? Figural Christology in the Four Gospels or something. And he basically approaches Christology from a different angle. He approaches it through intertextuality and looking at how the imagery of the Old Testament is applied to Jesus in the New. I want to throw some examples on the screen and then get your opinion on how convinced you are. What you think about all this. Let's see. Can you see that, Dr. Evans? Is that too
Yes.
small? You can see
Yes.
that? Okay.
I can see it.
I got two examples that he gives. This one is from Luke, where Jesus, and he points out that this is Jesus's first time in Luke's gospel going to Jerusalem. And he says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, killing the prophets and stoning those who are sent to you. How often I have desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings." And Hayes argues that this is alluding to various passages in the Old Testament, the ones I got on the screen, Deuteronomy 32 and Psalm 91, where Yahweh is depicted metaphorically as a bird, protecting his people Israel. And he argues that by creating this intertextual link, Luke is basically saying that Jesus is the embodiment of Yahweh. Another example is from Mark's gospel. It's when Jesus calms the storm on the Sea of Galilee, and the disciples ask him the question, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Hayes argues that Mark is trying to basically get you to, participate in the mystery, participate in the elusiveness of Jesus's identity. And for the reader who has ears to hear, will know in Israel's sacred scripture, it's Yahweh that calms the storms. And it actually parallels quite closely this Psalm 107 that speaks about God creating a storm, men on a ship, and their courage melts away. They go and they cry out to the Lord, and then the Lord stills the storm. And again, so Richard Hayes is arguing that these are very specific. It's not coincidence, that the gospel writers are echoing these Old Testament passages on purpose in order to depict Jesus as the embodiment of Yahweh. Do you think this is a valid reading? Do you find this convincing?
Yeah, I do. What you find in the Gospels are elusive, indirect. What you find in Paul is explicit. And you have the same idea where Paul in Philippians 2, he's dealing head on with, from a Roman point of view, a huge embarrassment. How in the world can you say your Lord, your Master, the Son of God, was crucified on a Roman cross? And so in that beautiful hymn, begins usually in verse 5, Philippians 2, 5 to 11, he talks about how Jesus, though existing in the form of God, didn't consider deity or equality to God something that had to be seized. He is echoing Roman imperial diction throughout. So he suffers a death, a slave's death, servilis supplicium. He's a slave, he dies even on a cross. And then he says that God will highly exalt him, give him the name that's above every name. At his name, every tongue will confess, every knee will bow. Ryan, that's right out of Psalm 45:23. And it makes the same point that Richard Hayes is making. So this is Paul. He knows that this is a Yahweh text. This is Yahweh speaking in Isaiah 45. He is saying, to be, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. Yahweh says. Paul knows that, and he applies it to Jesus. Here's another example. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, the rapture passage, verses 16 and 17. The Lord will descend with a shout, with a trumpet blast, and so on. This is Psalm 47:5, as we have it in English. It'd be 46:6 as it would be in the Greek. But in any case, we've got God goes up with a shout into the heavens. He's going to return the same way. Well, it's Yahweh we're talking about in Psalm 47. And now it's applied to Jesus, who will descend the same way with a shout and with command. Now, Paul doesn't say, oh, by the way, I'm quoting Psalm 47. He alludes to it. He takes the words, the phrases, and just weaves them into his text. This is the point that Richard Hayes makes. And that book, that was 1989, I think, when Echoes of Scripture in the Letters of Paul came out. It's a beautiful book, very influential. We did a special program on it in the Society of Biblical Literature program I chaired. And we gathered the papers. Richard wrote a response. We published them in the Studies in Scripture and Early Judaism and Christianity SSEJC series. This was back in early 30 years ago or more. Right. In any case, I've been a real fan of his, and his work on the gospel, same thing. So you get this echo of Scripture, words, phrases just woven right into the text. And in this case, it's very exalted, very suggestive material that hints at, or really explicitly affirms, a very high Christology.
Right. Even and in this case, even in Mark, which a lot of scholars will say there's not a high Christology in Mark, but I think there is.
Well, the Roman emperor wanted to prove, Caligula strung together some boats across a harbor, and he rowed, across them on these planks, and he said, now I can do what Poseidon does. Wait, it's ludicrous. But he was able to claim that he drove across a body of water. That's what God does.
Right.
And Jesus doesn't need planks and barrels and stuff like that. He walks on water. He commands the wind and the waves. And the disciples are just blown away. Who in the world can this be?
Right.
Well, he's no ordinary God. That's who.
Do you think so? The question in Mark that Jesus asked, why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. If that question is like a lot of the other questions in Mark, where I'm not that it's not a genuine question, but it's kind of a rhetorical question, trying to get the listener to really think. Do you see that question in that light as well? That he's not saying, no, I'm not God, don't call me God, but instead he's
no. It doesn't go down that path at all. The man